Hey, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Welcome to Good Story Live.
Season 2!
Ha! We didn't even plan that. Look at that.
I know. Season 2. Oh my goodness. Can you believe it?
Can't believe we made it this far. A lot of people can't believe it, but here we are, against all odds. Season 2 with more guests who want to be on the show and more people who want to watch. So,
who would have guessed?
Who would have thought? Ginger, when you and I come together on this program and provide the entertainment and the level of showmanship that we do on Good Story Live, apparently people enjoy that. So cheers to you.
Cheers to you as well. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What have you been doing for 6 months?
Mainly being mom.
Yes.
Mom. Yeah. I feel like there was a lot. How do you capture 6 months in like 60 seconds?
That's kind of what I was suggesting we do. 6 months in about 60 seconds.
Six months in about 60 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
We had birthdays. We went through our birthday gauntlets. We have 2 birthday gauntlets at the front half of the year. So we went through our birthday gauntlets. Grayson graduated pre-K. We are now in our summer before kindergarten, which is just like mind-blowing. He starts at the beginning of August, which is not that far away.
Yeah.
What else? I've done a lot of traveling. I went to Maine. I went to New York. Been in and around the Blue Ridge area in North Georgia. Been kind of hopping around. Just kind of enjoying it. I know.
Wow.
What about you? What have you been up to for 6 months?
6 months, 60 seconds. Okay, let's see here. I have been busy working on my new novel. So that has been, a lot of false starts, but finally in the thick of it. So we're doing well there. Poe and I went to Florida in spring, which was fun.
You didn't go during spring break, did you?
We did, and it was intentional. Actually, we're sitting there in the terminal. We're sitting in the airport, and all of a sudden, it's just all college kids. And we're like, a lot of college kids on this flight. And suddenly I'm thinking, oh my God, did I book our vacation during the middle of spring break? So I stopped this young lady who was wearing these glasses that had like one side was a margarita and the other was like a flamingo. And I felt like an idiot for even posing the question at that point because it was so self-evident. I said, excuse me, are you all here for spring break? She's like, yeah, spring break is this week. And I said, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I turned to my wife and I said, please shoot me now. But actually it was fine. It turned out fine. We were in an area of Fort Lauderdale, which spring break capital of the world, by the way. It wasn't just Florida. It was Fort Lauderdale.
Really? I was going to say, I feel like South Beach or like some of those areas would be like the popular. Never would have thought
Miami, the whole, but we stayed at on the area of the coast where a lot of the college students were not. So we had a fine time. It was symbiotic. It was two ecosystems existing side by side in harmony. So,
never really colliding.
No problems at all. So we had a nice time. We completed a move this year. So that's the new background, the new office. These are real. This is not a background. These are real. So
you mean it's not just gonna like collapse and fall down at some point during the season?
Well, if it does, you'll have to find a new co-host. So
oh gosh,
another one of these on that side of the office as well. So anyway, folks, we have an exciting guest today, and we're going to bring him on in just a minute. But before we do, we wanted to discuss something that we're going to be doing this season that we think will be fun. That will include you as the viewing audience. And it's called Movie of the Month. We are the first people to ever think of doing this.
Of course, duh. Completely original idea.
Yeah, okay. So maybe we don't have a copyright on that idea, but it's still something fun that we can incorporate. So the official title is Good Story Live's Movie of the Month. So we're not violating we're not infringing on anyone. The idea is that at the beginning of every month, this is the beginning of July right now, we are going to recommend a movie. Either Ginger or myself will recommend a single film.
We're going to take turns.
We're going to alternate every other month. Each person selects a film for not only us to watch, but you as the audience. And then at the end of the month, we will discuss it on the last episode of Good Story Live each month. So that will be fun. And to kick things off, the lovely and wonderful and brilliant Ginger Crosby has made a selection for the Good Story Lives movie of the month for July, and I have no idea what it is. And I'm terrified.
Should we share some of the other aspects of this? Or at least some of the things that we've discussed is I will, for most instances, be picking newer films.
Yes.
Whereas Jesse might be picking some slightly older films. So based on his
specialty, you know, are we?
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. So there's a little bit of specialty there. There's a little bit of you never know what you're going to get. You're going to have a very wide range of possibility. I'm very intrigued to see what Jesse picks for his first one next month. I'm sure he already has it.
Oh, for August? Absolutely. Yes.
He had it as soon as he pitched the idea.
Yes.
It's like, I feel like I know what it's going to be. Just like I'm sure you know what this one is going to be. You already know.
I know that there's a possibility, but then I also know you, and you love throwing me for a loop.
I do, but I'm not going to throw you for a loop. We're going to do the book that I know you haven't read, the movie I know you haven't watched, and that is Pride and Prejudice. Specifically, the Keira Knightley, Matthew McFadden. I think that's his name. I'm pretty positive that's his name.
Oh, the
2005 version.
Pride 2005.
Yeah, if you've got a flight coming up on Delta, I know they've got. I know because I've been on so many flights recently. I know they've got it on there, so just clock that in as your in-flight movie.
Fantastic. Pride and Prejudice 2005 with Keira Knightley. That's the version. I have not seen it, folks. I know about it. I have not seen the film.
You've never read the book? I can't believe you never read the book in high school.
Look, you know, I've read a lot of classic literature. I'm well read. That was one I just never got around to. So, but again, this is not, you don't have to read the book, folks. You just have to watch the movie. And then at the end of the month, the end of July, we will discuss it. And then the first week of August, I will give my recommendation, and we'll go from there. So
I think this will be so much fun.
It will be. This will be great. Lots of fun. So go out and rent, or if people still do that, or stream, which is probably the vast majority. Pride and Prejudice from 2005.
Now, also, what could be fun, which I don't know if we've discussed, but while you're watching it, recording a little snippet for either our friends on Instagram or TikTok.
There you go.
Sharing some thoughts that we can then come back and discuss.
Only Ginger would think of that. She's so good with the social media.
You know, I try sometimes.
Jesse's like, show's over. I'm done.
Bye.
See you next week.
It's okay. It's okay. We each bring something to the table, right?
We do. That's right. Exactly. All right. Well, we haven't done this in a while, Ginger. We might be a little rusty, but let's just kick it off and bring on our guest, shall we?
Let's do it.
We can think of some intelligent questions to ask him. Our first guest of season 2 is Dan Stout. He is a novelist and game writer who lives in Columbus, Ohio. His prize-winning fiction draws on travels throughout Europe, Asia, and the Pacific Rim, and his stories have appeared in publications such as the Saturday Evening Post, Nature, and Mad Scientist Journal, which I'll have to pick that. I got to pick that up and see what that's all about. Sounds right up my alley.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yes. You may also recognize the name of his wife, by the way, the talented narrator Mandy Fox, who was the narrator who voiced
Did All the Moonlight on Earth.
The one, the only book by Jesse so far, All the Moonlight on Earth. Phenomenal interview, phenomenal guest. We had her on last season. If you didn't see it, go back and watch. But now is Dan's time. So we're going to bring Dan on. We're going to talk to him. Dan Stout, welcome to Good Story Live.
Hey, guys. I'm so happy to be here.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I was just hanging out in the green room with all the Good Story Live interns eating donuts and listening to the pre-show. It was great.
Oh, man, I got to get me one of those after.
Were the donuts pretty good? Sometimes they're a little stale, but...
Oh, no, they were spot on. I love it.
Good. Well, we spare some expense, but try not to spare the donut expense here at Good Story Live. So Thanks again for being on the show. And let's kick it off here. We got a lot of questions for you. First, let's talk about your novels. Your novels have been described as a mixture of magical realism, police procedural, and thriller, kind of sometimes set in a noir setting. How did you come to that determination that was a genre that you wanted to create and that you wanted to write in?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. When I was first getting into writing, I was seriously writing. It's something that I'd always played around with and enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
But around 2012, I started getting really into it, and I started getting involved in the online writing communities.
Okay.
And there was one in particular called Liberty Hall. And sadly, it's not around anymore. But what they did was every week they ran a flash fiction competition. And Friday, I think at 8 p.m., you could go on and you could hit a button and you would get a prompt. And a timer would start. And you had 90 minutes to write an entire story based on that prompt.
Wow.
And then everyone who did it put their story into the forum. They were completely anonymous. And then we all read each other's stories and gave feedback. And the beautiful thing about that was that it completely took away any pressure to be good, because you only had 90 minutes to write a story. So you knew it wasn't going to be brilliant, it wasn't going to be polished. And because we did it every week and got immediate feedback, it was that really kind of intense, focused practice. So you tried something, you tried a different genre, you tried a different technique, you immediately got feedback on it, and you had no time to have second thoughts. You were just immediately thrown back into it. So what I found was week after week, as I did more and more of them, I kept touching back in one way or another on those kind of noir tropes of detectives and light and dark and all this sort of stuff. And I loved mixing it up with other genres. And I did everything from a noir story told on with a tween age crossing guard, so on a playground, to noir animals and all that sort of stuff. And one of the weeks I sat down and I came out with about the first half of the first chapter of my first book, and everyone connected with it and thought it was great and suggested that I run with it. So I just sort of did.
How awesome is that? What a great tool. I mean, unexpected too. Like, I would have never guessed that there was that sort of community at that time that existed. But I can imagine it's either completely liberating, the fact that you have this time constraint, this prompt, and you just kind of have to run with it, or it's completely terrifying. Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to write?
Oh, Ginger, it's both. It's both. That's the amazing part, is you just stumble into it, and it kind of prepares you for working on a consistent basis anyway, because that's also liberating and terrifying every time you sit down and look at a blank page.
Oh yeah. What a great tool for developing your process too, and like consistency with your process if you continue to show up. It's amazing. So you mentioned that you kind of always dabbled in writing and then started taking it more seriously and joined this form. At what age, though, would you say, if you had to think back, do you feel like the writing bug actually bit for you?
The earliest thing for me was, this is ridiculous, but it's completely true. I used to sit around with my GI Joes, and I would have battles, and I would make up a story about them, and I would kind of talk my way through it, and my mom would write down the story, and then I had to go back in. She would leave gaps in between every line, and I had to copy her handwriting to write out my own stories.
That's
so
fantastic.
I actually learned how to write cursive by copying down my own stories that I was coming up with.
Wow, what a great exercise! I love that. I'm sure you still have those somewhere, in the Dan Stout archive.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
That's fantastic. Yes. And did that? I mean, that kind of gets the creative juices flowing. Seeing your words on paper and seeing someone else's interest in them. What kind of stories are we talking about for young Dan Stout?
Oh, they were totally little boy stories. They were. I think the name of one was Castle Doom, You know,
That is such a little voice for a Ginger. That's what Grayson's going to be writing one day.
Oh yeah, yes, because I have a 5-year-old now, Dan. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I'm just thinking about doing this exercise with him. One, as a way to encourage like imaginative play. What a great exercise for them and a play for them, but also the practicing the writing. Okay, let's write down your story so that way you have it, and then you can practice writing. What? Brilliant. Brilliant of your mom. I just copied the newspaper when I was a kid. Practice my writing.
Yeah. No, tell us more about the young chronicles of Dan Stout.
I don't remember a whole lot right off the top of my head. I know there were 2 knights who were going around, and they were fighting an evil duke and all his minions of goblins and ogres and all that sort of stuff. And so I was, playing with a mix of different toys and, finding inspiration in those. But just kind of understanding that there was a voice, there was a person whose voice was coming through in the movies and the books and the things that I was consuming.
Right.
And knowing that was like, this had to be the best job in the world, this thing that was out there.
It's fascinating. My sense of play when I was young, I also had like this inner monologue, this narrator who would be kind of dictating the play and the action of the characters and the plot. And I think early on, I figured out that I liked what I could do in real life, but it was limited. And I wanted to transfer it to a world where it was unlimited and I could write, whatever and move them at will. So I love that. That's great. Yeah. So you kind of rose to prominence in the public sphere with the Carter Chronicles. That's the big Dan Stout name right now. How did that idea come to fruition? And tell our audience who might not be familiar with Titan what it's all about.
So the books are a series of 3 novels. They're sort of like Men in Black meets Chinatown. So it's a 80s buddy cop story that's filled with magic and monsters in an alternate world with 1970s technology. So it's disco wizards on roller skates and monsters with multiple mouths solving crimes. It is the most ludicrously wonderful, joyful thing I've ever done. It's totally fun.
Holy cow. Where did the inspiration for that come? Because it's so imaginative. Men in Black, I can see, like, when you said Men in Black, I'm like, okay, I can start to piece these things together, and then you start adding in all of these other components, and it's like, wow, that seems like a very magical world. Did you have something that inspired that for you, or did some of that come from that noir writing that you did as part of that group? Where did the inspo for that come from?
Yeah, that's exactly where it was. That's the that first chapter of the first book. That's more or less came out of that 90-minute session. And people
do you remember what the prompt was?
I kind of don't, to be honest. I've tried to go back in and remember. I think
that was going to be my question. Like, what was that one prompt that art Chinatown with monsters and Men in Black? Because what a prompt that was.
And who knows what it would have, who would have guessed it would have led to, the Carter Chronicles.
Well, and everyone loves Men in Black, but Chinatown's one of my favorite movies of all time. So now I'm really, really very interested in reading it. Tell us about your protagonist, because every protagonist, just from the covers and reading about him, he seems to me like the flawed hero kind of. Tell us about him.
So there's a couple things that I do with him that I think are interesting. One of them is because, as you guys have probably picked up, I throw a lot of weird at the readers right away. Like, it just comes straight at you, right? So I'm asking a lot for them to kind of jump on and go along with me.
Yeah.
So the advantage of having that noir detective trope and that noir detective kind of structure is that I give them a handrail to hold on to as we get stranger and stranger with magic and wizards and all this sort of stuff.
Right.
So I have those noir things that I thread through as a way to touch on. So in that way, Carter is very much like this kind of jaded, world-weary detective that readers are going to be accustomed to.
Yeah.
So that when you see his partner, who looks sort of like a bug or a lizard, and he has face mandibles, and he chews in this mouth, and he pulls it out, and he swallows through this one, and all this kind of thing. You have a little bit of normality to still kind of cling to.
Yes.
And the other thing that I think is really interesting about Carter is he presents himself to the world as a cynic, but he's not. He's a disillusioned idealist.
Yes.
And the key difference for me is that a cynic sees the world as fundamentally corrupt, fundamentally broken, fundamentally evil in a lot of ways.
Right.
Whereas the disillusioned idealist is the reason he's jaded is because he's seen how good things can be when people treat each other well, when people treat each other with kindness, and when people go out of their ways to help each other and make the world a better place. It can be wonderful, but it's not. And that's broken his heart so many times that he's got this shell of jaded exterior to protect himself. And that to me is a more interesting headspace to inhabit for 400 pages.
Yes. Yeah, because if you have a protagonist who's simply, into nihilism or a nihilist purely, and the world is, completely effed from the start, then there's no, there's nowhere to go from that. So I love that. I love the way you explain that. Tell me a little bit about, so I'm a standalone writer. My first novel was a standalone, the one I'm currently working on. I have an ambition to write a trilogy or to write a series. So tell me a little bit about the process of writing a serialized story over 1,000, 1,200 pages, whatever it's going to end up being.
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting is because I'm blending these two genres of fantasy and detective fiction is known for producing standalone works, whereas fantasy tends to be much more coherent. So over the course of 3 novels, novel 2 will pick up immediately where novel 1 leaves off. Not all the time, but that's typically genre expectations, or at least a stronger flow through of, continuity. So trying to find that balance between those two for the second book was, to be honest, really difficult for me.
Yeah.
And it's a different set of skills to write a sequel than it is to write a standalone. And you'd think it's the same thing. And a lot of it overlaps, but it ain't the same thing.
Yeah.
You really have to go in and polish a new set of ways to communicate to people without just giving them a complete info dump of the first book and the first paragraph, which I personally, as a reader, find really tedious to read through.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to do that to my readers. So trying to find a way to drop these breadcrumbs while still respecting the people who had read the first book, it took some doing, and I wrote that second book and I had 100,000 words in, but they were the wrong 100,000 words. And I had to go in and scrap a really big chunk of it and just start fresh and start over. But it was worth it. But yeah, it was a painful decision to go in there and just start hacking away the things that don't work.
Man, I have such respect for you and Jesse and on the writers that we've spoken to. When you pour so much in one direction, and then you have that moment where you realize, ooh, I don't know that this is the right direction for this, and you make that choice to pivot. Because gosh, I imagine it can either be a defeating moment or just it's just a challenging moment, I can imagine. Do you have any tools in your process, in your arsenal, now that you've been writing stories for a while, that help you kind of keep everything that's floating around in your mind organized when you're trying to get a story out on paper or digitally?
Yeah. So I do 2 things. Electronically, I use Scrivener. I know people who can write an entire novel in Word. I can't. There's no way I can. It's just too many plates spinning all at once. I need that kind of file structure and folder structure to really help me through things. The other thing is that I take a 3-ring binder and I have inserts that I put in, I 3-hole punch paper and I put it all in there. And then I paint the front of the binder with an airbrush. And I do all kinds of weird stylized stencils and kind of graffiti art all over it. And then I take shellac and I cover the whole thing in multiple layers of shellac. So it looks like a trapper keeper. like that really weird shiny cover.
Oh yeah.
And so I custom make my own Trapper Keeper
Nice.
and walk around with it like I'm a 7th grader, making up stories about monsters.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially all writers are, is you're 7th graders in adult bodies. That's fantastic. I love that, and a great motivator to keep the creative juices flowing and to keep you headed towards your goal. That's great. As a have you found certain behavior patterns or certain schedules keep you writing each day? Are you someone who writes a certain amount each day, or do you kind of just let it ebb and flow based on inspiration?
I try to write pretty much every day. When I really started tracking my time, the thing that I realized is when I skip a day, I never skip just one day. I'll always skip the following day.
Right.
And a pretty good chance I'll skip the 3rd day, and I might skip a 4th. So when you look at my days, I tend to either work every day more or less, or I have kind of big gaps of like a week, 4 days, 5 days.
Right.
And so if I can keep a little bit of work going and just keep that flywheel moving, I can make really good progress. But if I fall off of it, it's kind of painful.
Yeah.
So what I do is this, again, a lot of the things that I do are all about like finding that fun of being a kid again.
Right.
So I have all these calendars, like wall hanging calendars that I had as a kid that were all like fantasy and sci-fi and Tolkien calendars and all that sort of stuff.
I love it.
I saved all of them because I'm a pack rat.
Yeah.
And eventually calendars work again, right? So I pull out, like right now I've got a calendar from, I don't know what it is, like 1994 or something up on my wall. And then every day that I do my writing work, I put a little sticker in that day so you can see the days come across. And I actually found my sticker collection from when I was in 2nd grade. And so on the days when I really do a good job and I get a lot of writing work done, I take one of those novelty stickers out and I put up like, Voltron or the Smurfs or whatever nonsense I was watching back then. And so that goes up there, and it's just a way to kind of celebrate what I do with the kid that I was, who would be amazed that I do this for a living.
Oh, how awesome is that? From both you describing your Trapper Keeper and the fact that you have all of these old calendars from when you were a kid, it does sound like you get to bring a lot of fun and nostalgia that helps you kind of push through the process, even when it might not be easy, because if you have that piece to look forward to. It's awesome.
Yeah.
We know that Grayson loves his stickers, Ginger. So yet another infallible proof that he's meant to be a writer. So
yeah, hey, I'm sure
keep that kid close by with a pen.
Yep.
Dan, I want to ask you a follow-up question on your writing process because, for lack of a better term, regardless of what you think of the writing styles, there's kind of 2 beliefs of writing technique right now, which is the George R.R. Martin way and the Stephen King way, right? Which is one is the the architect and one is the gardener concept, which is one has it fully planned out ahead of time, right? The outline completely written before they put the first word in the first paragraph, the first sentence. And the other is the gardener who likes to plant the seeds and see what comes up. And they need to be surprised by their own narrative. They have to be surprised by the plot at some point. Otherwise, they have difficulty in motivating themselves to put pen to paper. So if you had to choose, or if you had to lean one direction or the other, which one are you?
So bear with me with this answer, because this is the truth. So for short stories, I am a pantser, right? Like I just jump in and I can just start writing, because a story is only going to take up a set amount of time, and I have that experience of doing all those kind of rapid prototypes with the short stories in 90 minutes. So I can just sit down and knock stuff out. For longer works, I really need to work with some kind of plot structure. And I use all kinds of different plot structures. And I break them out and I use them while I'm creating the book. I use them while I'm kind of tweaking and changing the draft. And I use it when I'm going back in and editing. And I try to use different structures at each point, because all of them kind of overlap and give you the same effect, but in a slightly different way. It's sort of like measuring a stick with a yardstick or a meter stick. it's the same thing that you're measuring, but the numbers are a little bit different, so it gives you a different perspective on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I really like doing that, and I like engaging with it that way. The other thing that I do is I tend to really structure out my plot so I know what's happening and I know when my key pivot moments are.
Right.
But I keep a much looser hand with things like dialogue and character development. So
Yeah.
I like to be surprised by how the characters get from point A to point B. And that feels very organic to me, but the plot overall is a much tighter structure.
Yeah. Our writing, the process is very similar. I would agree with that. That's how I do it as well. I need to have, for the plot, I'm very much a plot-driven writer. It has to be all laid out. I need to know where it's going and point A to point B, but I like to be surprised by character development and how they get from point to point. That's a great way of putting it. I love that. Do you, you mentioned your short stories, and I think you've won even a few awards for them. Tell us about short story writing and how is that, where did that inspiration come from, and what kind of short stories do you write?
Well, I've always loved short stories. Like as a kid reading, I loved those big anthologies of short stories of all different lengths and genres. And I used to read the like the Alfred Hitchcock collections, like Ghostly Tales and Haunted Houseful and all those. I still have most of those. And Edgar Allan Poe short stories and things like that. I just was always drawn to them. And I think going in and finding my own voice was essential to me to go through short stories first. Some people go straight to novels or straight to some other format, but short stories let me try several different things in rapid iteration. And there's just something wonderfully distilled and powerful about a short story. I don't know, it's like a single malt scotch instead of a blended. It's this one thing, but really boiled down and condensed. And that's kind of lovely.
Yeah. It made me curious. Have you ever sat down with, aside from the Carter Chronicles, where it's, for this first chapter gets fleshed out, but where you start with the intention of something being a short story and you realize, oh, wait, I've actually got more to share here that you've kind of held on to, and, has it turned into any other projects or no, my short stories are my short stories?
Largely the short stories stay short stories because they're kind of like a distinct goal. Though sometimes I do kind of pull out different aspects and play around with them. And I have a hard drive full of short stories that were attempts and kind of first drafts and broad strokes. So they didn't go anywhere, but they're always a learning process. It's like a artist filling up sketchbook after sketchbook of neat things that aren't quite ready for prime time.
And short stories seem, for writers that maybe are still developing their voice, their process, seem like a really accessible way to start storytelling. Because for somebody like me, the idea of writing a novel, not that I have any idea of writing a novel, Jesse, stay in your chair.
I'm waiting. I'm waiting for you to publish. I'm ready for it.
Bring
it on.
The idea of writing something to that scale, I was like, I'm listening to you guys. I can't even. My brain does not compute. That's all I can say. My brain does not compute.
Sometimes ours doesn't either, Ginger.
Yeah. So Jesse and I have talked about this, Dan. Do characters talk to you in your head, or because I know for Ava DeLaurier, whom we've talked to before, and some of the other writers, characters kind of talk to them, and that's how they develop. Do you? Yeah,
they talk to each other in my head.
They talk to each other. Is that how it is for you too, Jesse?
Yeah, I make jokes about mental illness a lot with that, but actually the reality is it's conversations that I think of, that the characters are, oh, that would be a controversial thing, or that would be a very serene romantic moment. That's How about for you, Dan?
Yep, same thing with me. It's like I run through a lot of the dialogue between different characters and see how they bounce off. But there's no sense that the character is addressing me personally ever. And some writers do have that. They have that kind of feeling. So
they do. No, I'm glad mine are less accusatory and take things personally. Tell us a little bit about, if you're allowed to, any of your current projects or something that's coming down the pike? Anything you're allowed to share?
Yeah, there's a number of things that I'm working on right now. You mentioned that I do some game writing, and that's something I've been branching out into and trying more of, because novel writing is awesome and I love it. I love having my own imaginary world, but it's also kind of isolating. So I've been looking for do things that are more collaborative and involve different disciplines. So I did some work with comic books, and I've been doing work for board game companies, kind of creating cold case mystery dossiers. If you've ever seen, yeah, so like you'd order one and it shows up and it looks like a police dossier about this crime that happened, and it's got physical clues in it, and that's so much fun because it's I come up with the puzzles and I put everything together and I pitch it to the board game company and they say yes, they say no. We talk to the graphic designer and say like, all right, here's the clue, and they come back, they say, well, that's not in the budget, but what else can you do? So it's working around these constraints, and it's still telling a story, but when you just have a police dossier, you can start reading wherever you want.
Love that. Ginger, I'm sure you've played a game like that where, and you've got
murder mystery dinner.
Yes, and a little story about the murder victim before they got offed. Like
I've got one sitting right over there.
How did you even get connected with people like that? Because I never thought of that actually being a job.
No, same.
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly how I started thinking of the game writing, because obviously people write for games, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't present in my head. And then I started looking into it, and I started just kind of putting out feelers. And I found a woman named Susan O'Connor, and she was teaching a class on game writing. So I followed up there. I started to learn about, more like different ways to kind of present a story in a non-linear fashion. And I found, one company in the UK that was doing some games. And then once you have some experience in it, then you're starting to, develop a name for yourself in this sub niche. So, now I'm becoming more and more proficient with it. One of the companies I worked with, we just did a classic monsters game. So that's in production right now. So the idea is, you're at a Halloween party with Dracula and Dr. Jekyll.
Yeah.
Someone has unsewn Frankenstein monster's head and taken out the brain, and no one knows where the Invisible Man is. So you have to put together the clues and figure out where he is and all this sort of stuff.
Oh, I love it. I'm so glad you mentioned this, because I remember Jesse mentioning it during the bio, and I was like, ooh, how am I going to bring this back up? And it completely left my mind as we were talking in conversation, because I was wondering, what types of games is it? Is it like board games? Tell me more about this. That's awesome.
Can you mention any of the names of the games you've worked on?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one of the most recent ones is called Abducted: The Case of Dottie Gibson. It's from Tabletop Detectives. I think it's another UK company, so it's on Amazon UK.
Yeah.
But again, you order it, you get this physical package. It looks really cool, and I got to write up police interviews and plot clues, and we did some cool digital files too. So there's, at one point you might find some voicemails. So you'd log into the internet, and so, working with voice actors and all this kind of stuff. So it's a lot of fun.
That's
so
amazing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of voice actors, we do have to mention your wife just one more time here, because it dovetails with a question I wanted to ask you anyway. She is obviously a phenomenal narrator of many different types of books, many of them fiction. She was on Broadway for many years and brings a lot of that talent with her. Will there ever be a Dan Stout novel read by his talented wife, Mandy Fox?
Well, she has done one of my short stories.
Oh.
And when she first started off, and I went away for a writing retreat, so I was gone for a weekend. And when I came home, she had gone from not doing any audio narration to she had spent the weekend building a sound booth in the closet. She had downloaded audio engineering software and taught herself how to use it, set everything up, and put together a demo reel.
Wow.
That
does not surprise me at all.
No.
It absolutely amazed me. And so for one of the first things that she did is she was kind of like learning and establishing herself. She went ahead and did a novella of mine called Sin Titulo. And it's again, it's one of those magical realism things and totally fun. And it's about a teenage boy whose life gets upended in an unexpected way. And yeah, it's just really fun. And she does a great kind of confused teenage boy who's in over his head.
I can imagine it. She does do the way that she manipulates her voice is amazing.
Yeah. And it's so great having a spouse who is creative as well and works in like an adjacent field. So we can compare notes, and I can learn from the way that an audio expert does things, and she can see what I'm doing as a writer. And we really try to take time to kind of celebrate our victories and things we do. And just in case, this is from Mandy's office, like a nice framed copy of the cover.
Yes. Oh, the moonlight on Earth.
Yeah. So it's just really, really fun. And, we just
she framed that. She did such a good job, not to make it about me for a moment, but she did such a good job on that novel. Yeah, we were really impressed.
Yeah.
It's just, it's important when you get to work with, she was so happy working with a really fun book with cool plots and great characters and the opportunity to stretch herself. So you're working with good material and adapting it to a new form. It's just fun. It's the same reason that I like to work with games and to work with other creators. So she enjoys working with Jesse and working with other authors who can do that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Now, you have such a variety of experience, and I feel like have done from series to short stories to game writing. Is there any advice that you could offer aspiring writers of fiction that maybe want to write but have no idea where to even get started? The young Dan, playing with the G.I. Joes. What advice would you have to offer them?
I think the best advice is to understand the paradoxical nature of writing advice. And that is that all of it is accurate and none of it is true. What I mean is that all of it, everyone who gives writing advice, whether it's me or another author or whoever, is sincerely telling their personal experience. And they're giving techniques and tools and things that work for them, but none of it is 100% true with a capital T, in that none of it is universal. So what works for me and what works for Jesse and works for somebody else won't necessarily work for each other. And in fact, the things that work for me now as a 48-year-old Dan did not work for 35-year-old Dan. And the things change and evolve. So the stuff that I suggest now and that I can share now for what works for me would not necessarily have been helpful for me earlier. So understanding that you just have to try different things until you find what works for you right now is actually kind of counterintuitive. Like, it doesn't make sense when you sit down and dive in. You want the keys to the kingdom. And the sad answer is that the lock changes every day and you have to try something different.
That is such sage advice, sir. You are absolutely right. Not only on finding what works for you, but that it changes over time. Yes, I have sensed that even a little bit in my own writing, and even in this novel, I've realized that I needed to approach it entirely differently than my last project. So you learn a lot about yourself in the perpetual failure, getting beaten down and get up again the next day and try it again. Nature of writing. I think that's great. What this is the post that was supposed to be the last question, because we always ask that as the last question of every guest, but we're going to do a postscript last question, which is, tell us about the tentacles behind you. I think that's just cool. Jen, you were hoping I'd ask that.
No. So yes, I was hoping that we would have time to ask this question, because I don't know why, but this last time when I was watching Dan on my screen answer the question, I saw the full scale of and I realized, oh wait, that's tentacles. I feel like we need to ask him about that. So I'm so glad that you did, Jesse.
So these are just vinyl stick-ons. I think they're like 10 or 15 bucks on Amazon. And Mandy had gotten them for me as a Christmas present. years ago. And then when the pandemic rolled along and all of a sudden I needed like a good Zoom room, I just pulled them out of the closet, threw them up behind the couch, and all of a sudden it looked like I had something really clever. But the other thing that's come really in handy is when I talk to game companies, a lot of times people look at me and say like, oh, wow, yeah, you remind me of my dad. This is great. And they assume that I'm kind of like stodgy and dad-like and all this kind of thing. And I need to convince them that I'm actually this crazy weirdo who can write stories about whatever they want. And so it acts as a visual shorthand to say like, ooh, artsy, creative person. And it just kind of reinforces that and helps break a little bit of a stereotype that people might have about a middle-aged bald guy.
Yeah, I never would have guessed that you would have decorated your trapper keepers or have tentacles on your wall.
See, that's what I'm missing. I'm missing the tentacles. That's
not Jesse though. Like this is Dan for sure.
That
like
is Dan.
Tentacles on the wall. I'm thinking you need to put your calendars up there too. Like, you know. Yes.
Dan, I was going to ask, where can people follow you? Where can they find you online? Where can they, with anticipation, await the next Dan Stout literary work?
Well, the very best place is just head over to my website. It's danstout.com. And you can find my newsletter there. It's called The Campfire, and it comes out every month. And what I try to do with it, everyone tells the writers that we need to have a newsletter. And I think newsletters are just boring as anything on the planet. So what I really try to do is I try to replicate the feeling of sitting around in the dark, huddled around a campfire, telling stories and hanging out with your friends as you eat s'mores.
Love it.
So if I can do that, then it's entertaining for me. Hopefully it's entertaining for readers. So come on down, pull up a seat at the campfire. It's totally fun.
I'll sign up for that.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's
Put
wonderful.
me down for a s'more, Dan. I'll be there with you.
Absolutely. Bring some more of those green room donuts with you. So the ones with the sprinkles.
Will do, yes. The ones with little cinnamon sprinkles on them, for sure.
That's right.
Dan Stout, ladies and gentlemen, our guest today on Good Story Live. All the links to his socials and his website will be in the description below and on goodstorylive.com.
Absolutely.
And Dan, we're just really honored that you be on the show and tell us about your process. And we look forward to having you back again at some point to talk more writing, because this has been great.
Yes,
absolutely. I'd love to come back. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Talk to you again soon.
See you.
Dan Stout, danstout.com. Go check it out. And then obviously all of his other socials, they're all linked here, as Ginger makes sure happens. So.
I do. I'm so glad you asked about those tentacles, because I finally realized that they were tentacles.
Yes.
I was like,
he's got 20,000 leagues under the sea, what's going on here. I love it.
Very much that vibe.
Folks, next week we have a musician on who I'm very excited to talk to. His name's Peter Demore. He's local here to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, actually. My wife and I saw him at a restaurant, and he played this phenomenal set. And we're going to talk to him about his musical process, how he writes songs and performs them in a live venue. So look forward to that, Ginger.
Wait. Hey, welcome back, by the way.
Thank you. Welcome back to you. It's so nice to see you. You look tan as all get out. I don't know if that's the lighting or you were in the sunshine, but
I think it's a little bit of both. It's summertime. I'm outside with the kids, trying to be at the pool, all that. Yeah. Well, it's a little bit of everything, we'll say.
Well, it's great to do this again with you.
I thank you guys, the audience, for being back as well.
Yeah. Season 2 has officially kicked off. Don't forget about Good Story Live's movie of the month. The first movie being
Pride and Prejudice. Keira Knightley, 2005.
Don't get it mixed up. All right.
It'll be in the description below as well if you wanted to join in for that.
It'll be fun. And we'll all discuss it by the end of the month. So you have 3.5 weeks to watch it. So get it done early, and then you can ruminate on the story being told. Ginger, it's been fun. We will see you next week, all right?
See you next week.
Bye, folks.
Bye.